His body lay there on the metal table. I looked at the hole on his back near the right kidney with my fingers interlaced, thinking, a lot of people might rub their chin or lean on a counter, but I'd learned not to do that in med school. Just lace your fingers together, nitrile glove on nitrile glove. It avoids a lot of contamination issues. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sterile, unwavering sound that mirrored the precision required of my work. It was a sound I'd grown to rely on, a constant in the chaos of the job. All of us at the coroner's office had been putting in some serious overtime since the hurricane had hit the coast. The news said it was the worst ever recorded. Rain still poured down, and the streets were half flooded even if you weren't in the storm surge. Our facility was close to capacity, and we needed to get those bodies properly before sending them to a morgue. The air hung thick with the scent of disinfectant, doing little to mask the underlying odor of everything. I'd grown used to it, of course, a necessary desensitization. I'd been a medical examiner for 15 years, but even I had days where the weight of it all threatened to crush me. Today felt like one of those days. This man, though, this case was different. A day after the storm hit, this particular body was recovered from a street flooded with the surge. When we ran prints, he had an exceptional criminal record, a rainbow of petty offenses and a couple of aggravated assaults. The finger-width hole was assumed to be from a bullet. A plausible conclusion would be that he was looting. The police had already filed a preliminary report reflecting that theory. It saved them paperwork, and frankly, it saved us time. More bodies waited. What I was dealing with here wasn't adding up, though. What had been labeled an entry wound looked a lot more like an exit wound to me. It was larger, rougher, and didn't have any abrasion from a bullet entry. The skin around it wasn't puckered inwards, it was blown outwards, almost as if something had exited with force. Details like that were unreliable on bodies that had been in the water for a while, the elements causing distortion, but I saw no evidence of bacterial decomposition obscuring the wound. It was also a bit strange that the man had clawed at the area around the hole, frantic, desperate scratches that marred the pale skin. Maybe it was a reaction to the pain. Maybe, but something felt off. I walked to the small window overlooking the parking lot, the rain lashing against the glass. The wind howled, mimicking the unsettling feeling in my gut. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize. Maybe the preliminary assessment was correct. Maybe the water had simply altered the appearance of the wound. Maybe I was just tired, overworked, and seeing things that weren't there. But in my years as a medical examiner, I had learned to trust my instincts, and my instinct was screaming at me that something was horribly wrong. There was a simple solution to this puzzle. If it was a gunshot wound with no exit, there would be a bullet. I needed to find it. That's where I would start. I turned him onto his back. Normally, someone would have helped me, but we were totally swamped. Rolling over a dead body weighing more than you do is hard work, but this wasn't my first rodeo. It was mechanical, almost practiced. A grim dance I'd performed countless times. I started the Y-incision to open up the chest and abdominal cavities. The scalpel slid through tissue with a sickeningly smooth ease. Really, you're doing that now? Flynn was about 14 hours into his shift. He was younger, still relatively new to the job. He hadn't yet developed the same thick skin, the same compartmentalization. I couldn't blame him for wanting to get the easier bodies out of there and keeping the rest on ice so he could go home. He had a wife and 2 young children, I knew. I'm the doc, I call the shots. I'm working on this one, but I can do it alone. You just keep processing those others. Yeah. His voice was resigned, not resentful. Shoulders shrugged in his scrubs. I didn't need to see behind the surgical mask to know he was frowning. This was a tough week for all of us. The weight of the storm, the sheer number of casualties pressed down on everyone. Even Flynn was starting to fray at the edges. Once I'd gotten the abdomen open, I started checking his left side. The first thing I noticed was that the kidney was missing. A lot of people only have one kidney. That wasn't what I was looking at. Both arteries and the ureter had been severed. Cleanly, precisely severed. Perhaps the bullet had passed through those, since there was notable tissue damage and internal bleeding. However, the condition of the connective tissues meant that he still had the kidney until very recently, and bullets don't make organs disappear. They crush, they fragment, they leave behind remnants. This was surgical, too clean for blunt force trauma. So what does make organs disappear? The question echoed in my mind, a growing dread settling in my stomach. I looked up, scanning the room, feeling a prickle of unease. The humming of the lights suddenly seemed louder, more oppressive. It felt like I was being watched. Perhaps it had moved around once it wasn't attached to anything. Stranger things had happened. The whole abdomen had to be examined anyway, so I just carried on, figuring I would find it at some point. I methodically explored the cavity, running my gloved fingers along the inner walls, searching for any sign of the missing kidney. I discovered a large hole in the liver. Removing the deep red organ carefully, I turned it over in my hands. There was only one hole, perfectly circular, almost as if drilled. If a bullet was in him, it would be there. It should be there. But it was. The organ felt strangely light, almost hollow. It felt heavy, the cold, wet mass wanting to slip from my gloves. Normally, I would expect a liver this large to be fatty, a testament to a life of poor choices, but this didn't look like it. It was remarkably lean, almost healthy. Curious, I put it on the scale, 2.4 kg. That was big, very big. A healthy liver, certainly, but unusually large. I went to write the weight down and to take a break. Normally, an assistant would do it. I took off my gloves to write notes on everything so far, massaging my stiff neck for a moment. The scent of formaldehyde seemed to cling to my skin. When I checked the clock, it was 10:45 p.m. I hadn't realized so much time had passed. Fatigue was setting in, making my vision blurry and my thoughts sluggish. Grabbing a coffee, you want one? I asked Flynn, trying to sound cheerful. Yes, please. Actually, if it's not too much trouble, can you grab me a water, too? Good idea. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to walk, to get some air in my lungs. Flynn was right. I'd forgot to drink any water or eat or do anything but work the last 5 hours or so. I poured a couple of coffees and tucked 2 water bottles into my pockets. Making my way back down the fluorescent white hallway, I shouldered through heavy doors that pushed open from either side. They were convenient for moving bodies or when you were carrying multiple beverages. They also made me feel like I was moving through the bowels of a massive machine. You doing all right? I asked, handing Flynn his drink. Doing just fine. Appreciate the drinks, Doc. He gave a nod, a flicker of a smile behind the mask. I downed the entire water bottle in one go, then drank about half of my coffee. The warmth spread through my chest, momentarily easing the chill that had settled in my bones. I checked my phone for anything from my husband. Text me when you're heading home. Love you. He was probably asleep already. Sleep sounded pretty good, a soft, comforting oblivion, but I had a kidney to find. I put on my lab coat, gloves, mask, and glasses. The ritual of suiting up felt strangely comforting, a way to armor myself against the realities of the job. Seeing the liver, I froze in confusion. In the sterile white light, it looked deflated. This had been a long shift, but I wasn't imagining things. My note said 2.4 kg, but the scale now read 1.1 kg. The numbers glared at me, a digital accusation. Hurrying over, I stared at the green LED numbers as if they might change again. I recalibrated the scale, double-checked the settings. Still 1.1 kg. Impossible. I was about to pick the liver back up when I noticed a wet, dark trail streaking from the metal plate of the scale, onto the counter, then down to the tile floor. The liquid was dark, viscous, and smelled faintly metallic. Flynn, can you come look at this? My voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear that was creeping in. I tried to sound calm, but the rapidity with which Flynn came over suggested that I had not succeeded. What am I looking at? He asked, his voice strained. I weighed that liver at 2.4, wrote it down, got us coffees, and when I came back it weighed 1.1 and there's this trail going across the floor. So, part of it fell, he offered, hopefully. His conclusion was rational, but not correct. If it fell, why did it leave a trail that goes halfway across the room before fading out? Also, I feel compelled to mention that the body was in the water. Oh, his voice was low and concerned. This is bullet hole guy. Yep. We stood there looking at the gruesome trail, a smear which started dark and clear at the scale but was untraceable about halfway across the room. The air grew colder, heavier, charged with an indefinable dread. It felt as if the very walls of the morgue were closing in on us. We've got to find it, don't we? His eyes were visibly concerned, even behind the goggles. Of course he was right, but the question was not whether we had to find it, rather what it was. There was a growing certainty in my mind that it was not an inanimate object, but rather a living organism. Something that had been inside that man. I'm not a squeamish person. There's no need to go into details here, but I've seen a lot of things working as a coroner. There are a lot of insects associated with decomposing bodies, sure. Maggots, beetles, flies, all the usual suspects. None of those insects are 1.3 kilograms, or capable of burrowing into and removing a major organ. My best guess is that it's an eel. Check the floor, get everything it could crawl under away from the walls, slither under. Whatever eels do on land, it can't have gone far, I said, trying to sound authoritative. We checked the small space under the cabinets all around the room. I checked under the instrument table, everywhere I could think of. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden menace. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. I jumped when I heard metal clatter to the floor. Flynn cursed. My first instinct was that the creature had knocked something down, but Flynn had just bumped a tray accidentally. I could tell his nerves were thin, as were mine. We were both operating on adrenaline and fear. "It's not here," he said, his voice trembling. "Do you want me to check the next room?" I glanced at the doorway. The rubber sweeps on the base of the door looked secure. I doubted anything could have gotten through, but doubt was all I had left. "Let's just slow down and think for a second," I said, forcing myself to take a deep breath. The whole search had been a panicked reaction. When we had started, my intuition had been that whatever had come out of the man's liver would be laying on the floor somewhere. Since it wasn't, we would need a new strategy. We needed to think like whatever this thing was. "Blacklight," I said, my voice raspy. Behind his mask, Flynn nodded in agreement, quickly going to a drawer and pulling out a blacklight shaped like a baton with two long bulbs encased in a plastic frame. He flipped it on, carefully walking toward the scale. The trail glowed a sinister yellow-green under the ultraviolet light. Initially, the dark smears were obvious even to the naked eye, but where they had first seemed to disappear now lay a faint, glowing trail. The trail wasn't just a liquid, it was leaving behind some kind of residue, some kind of marker. "What are those little marks along both sides? Do eels have like flippers?" Flynn asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I think some of them do," I replied, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't an eel. Perhaps my voice indicated it, but looking at this strange track, I was becoming less confident we were searching for an eel. When the trail meandered across the floor toward a gurney, a nauseous feeling started in my stomach. As it went up the wheel, then coiled around the stainless steel leg, acid began to enter my throat. It was too precise, too deliberate. A closed body bag lay at the end of the blacklight's trail. The body bag that held the victim from the fishing boat, the one we hadn't got to yet. "We're turning the body over," I said, my voice flat. Flynn didn't want to, but he nodded. We turned the black bag over on the stainless steel gurney, and I found what I was looking for, a finger-sized hole through the plastic, perfectly round and glowing with the same eerie green hue as the trail. "Oh God." Flynn's hand went to cover his mouth in horror, but his reflexes stopped the rubber glove a few inches short. "All right, take it to the freezer. Fast, let's go." With no hesitation, we pushed the gurney, the body bag, the body, and whatever was inside it through the swinging doors, then turned down the hall. With one hand on the gurney, I reached out for the long, horizontal handle on the stainless steel doors of the insulated freezer room. I was in denial when I felt something sharp on my glove. It had to be the zipper on the bag, I told myself. As my head whipped around, Flynn screamed. A breathy "ha" noise escaped my lips. The front of it had some kind of teeth or mandibles, evenly spaced and radiating from what must have been its mouth. Behind that, small, sharp legs, perhaps an inch long, were going across the back of my glove. They must have been sharp because they had easily cut through the nitrile and left small pinpricks of blood. The whole thing was jointed, armored, looked like bone. I saw a glistening, dark form writhing inside the bag. All of this I tell you from memory. Part of me wants to think that I misremembered the thing on the back of my hand, but I know what I saw. It burned into my retinas like a photograph, even though I violently flung my arm the moment I saw it. Pointed legs dug into my skin, and the length of the monstrosity was pulled out from the body bag and flung across the hall, as I shook my arm as hard as I could in panic. It left a wet mark where it hit the wall, then flopped to the ground. Before I knew it, the thing had scurried toward the exit doors, legs scratching at the base of them, then found a tiny gap right in the middle. As it forced its way under, I noticed with horror it must have been about 3 feet long. I ran back the way we had come, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall. I couldn't tell you whether I would have sprayed it or bludgeoned it, but I needed to stop it. If nothing else, I needed to know what it was. I needed it desperately. Flynn stood frozen in the hall as I kicked the exit doors open, stepping out into the parking lot in the downpour, searching puddles and currents of water under dim yellow street lights. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring my vision. A deep puddle had formed around an overflowed storm drain a little ways out, and I saw the water rippling back and forth as if a fish were swimming in it. That was the last I ever saw of it. That storm drain led right back to the ocean, from whence it came. After perhaps 30 seconds in the rain, I came back in, completely soaked and trailing water on the tile. Flynn just stared at me, his face pale with shock. "Sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "Nothing to apologize for, you did everything right," I replied, trying to regain my composure. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I have no idea." "So it's just something that came up out of the ocean and eats dead bodies." Taking the glove off to look at the wounds on my hand, I shook my head. They were small, but they were there, a grim reminder of what I'd encountered. Gunshot wound was supposed to be cause of death, remember. His eyes went wide behind the goggles, and I couldn't help but remember the marks on the body where the man had clawed at his back. I wondered what would have happened to me if that thing had got to a softer part of me, rather than reaching my hand first. I took a 3-month leave, officially for stress and trauma, unofficially because I couldn't face another autopsy table. I couldn't face the possibility of encountering that thing again. I see a therapist twice a week and I still have nightmares. Dreams of dark, swirling water and glistening, armored legs. I tried reporting it, of course, but who would believe me? A seasoned coroner describing a creature that defies all known biological classification. They suggested exhaustion, stress, a vivid imagination. They said I needed to rest. I ended up renting a small motel room in a town a few hours inland, Port Lament, Oregon. It's a quiet place surrounded by forests and mountains. I tell people I'm writing a book. I tell them it's a novel, a mystery. The truth is, I spend my days staring at the rain, haunted by the memory of a hole in a body bag and the creature that crawled out of it. I drove there in my car, a 20-year-old Honda Civic. The drive was long, gray, and filled with drizzle. The motel clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Doris, didn't ask too many questions. She just handed me a key and pointed me to room 7. I spent the first few days in a daze, barely eating, barely sleeping. I paced the small room, replaying the events in my mind, searching for some logical explanation. But there was none. It was just wrong. Fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. Last night I couldn't sleep. I woke up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, sweating. I crept to the window and looked out at the forest. The trees were black silhouettes against the gray sky, swaying gently in the wind. And then I saw it, a faint, greenish glow emanating from the woods near the stream that runs behind the motel. It was a faint glow, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. The same eerie green light that had illuminated the trail in the morgue. I slammed the curtains shut, my hands shaking. I knew with a sickening certainty that it had followed me. It had found me. And I knew, too, that this quiet little town wouldn't be quiet for long. The storm wasn't over. It had just followed me home.